On my first day in the office, my overbearing mother-in-law handed me a mop and ordered me to clean the floor. I refused because I had been appointed as a personal advisor, not a cleaner. She became angry and demanded, "Why don't you obey my orders?" Furious, she threw hot coffee on me, burning my hand and face. I was in pain and crying. To my shock, my husband sided with her and kicked me out of the house. An hour later, I returned with my brother and gave them a shocking surprise they could never have imagined. I still remember the day I first met Liam. It was during our second year in college, and we were both finance majors. Liam was charming, with an easy smile and an ambition that matched my own. We started as study partners, then friends, and soon enough, we were inseparable. By the time we graduated, we were deeply in love, and marriage felt like the natural next step. After graduation, I had dreams of making a mark in the world of finance, but Liam's family was rooted in tradition. His mother, Caroline, was an imposing woman who seemed to have a strong hold over every aspect of Liam's life. She ran their family business in Chicago and had made it clear from the beginning that she valued control and loyalty above all else. When Liam proposed, I was thrilled. We moved to Chicago shortly after, and I was hopeful for a fresh start, a life of love and mutual respect. Initially, things seemed wonderful. Liam was attentive, and Caroline, while stern, was cordial enough. But as the days turned into weeks, the cracks began to show. Caroline had a way of making me feel small, without saying much. She would comment on everything, from the way I dressed to how I cooked, always with a thinly veiled criticism. "Oh, Barbara, you're so modern," she'd say with a laugh, as if it were a flaw. I brushed it off at first, telling myself that adjusting to a new family takes time. But it wasn't just her words. It was her actions. She'd rearrange the kitchen after I had organized it or redo tasks I had completed, as if to say I wasn't good enough. Liam, unfortunately, did little to intervene. "She's just like that," he would say, shrugging off her behavior as unchangeable. Still, I held on to hope. I thought if I could prove my worth, things would get better. I decided to approach Liam about joining their family business. With my finance degree and fresh perspective, I believed I could contribute meaningfully. Liam was hesitant at first. "You know how my mom is," he said. "She likes to keep things traditional." "Liam, I just want to help," I replied. "I want to be part of this family in every way." Eventually, he agreed. "Fine," he said, though his tone didn't sound entirely supportive. "I'll talk to her." The morning of my first day at the office, I dressed carefully, wanting to make a good impression. I arrived with excitement, ready to prove myself. But when I walked into the office, Caroline's face froze. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her tone sharp. "I've joined the business," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. She laughed, a cold, humorless sound. "Oh, really? And what do you think you'll be doing here?" Before I could answer, she continued, "You can start by cleaning the office. There's a mop in the closet. You'll find it soon enough." I was stunned. "That's not my job," I said firmly. "I'm here to work in finance, not as a cleaner." Her face darkened. Without warning, she grabbed a cup of hot coffee from her desk and hurled it at me. The liquid scalded my hand and soaked my blouse. I gasped in pain, staring at her in disbelief. "Now clean this up," she said with a sneer. Liam, who had been standing nearby, said nothing. He just looked away, as if he couldn't be bothered. That moment broke something in me. The humiliation, the pain, and Liam's silence, it was too much to bear. I left the office, tears streaming down my face, my heart heavy with betrayal. That night, I packed my things and called my brother, Ethan, who lived in New York City. He was my anchor, the one person who had always believed in me. "Ethan," I said, my voice trembling, "I need your help. I can't stay here anymore." "Barbara, what happened?" he asked, his tone filled with concern. I told him everything, the insults, the coffee, Liam's indifference. By the end, I could hear the anger in his voice. "Come to New York," he said. "You don't have to deal with this alone." And just like that, I knew what I had to do. The life I had dreamed of with Liam was gone, replaced by a reality I could no longer ignore. My love for him had been overshadowed by his silence and Caroline's cruelty. It was time to leave and start anew. As I boarded the train to New York, I felt a mix of emotions: sadness for what I had lost, anger for how I had been treated, and a quiet determination to rebuild my life. What I didn't know was that this journey would lead me to uncover secrets that would change everything. Leaving Chicago felt like shedding a heavy weight. When I arrived in New York City, Ethan was waiting for me at the station. His warm hug and reassuring smile were exactly what I needed. Ethan had always been my rock, calm, wise, and fiercely protective. "Barbara," he said gently as we sat down in his apartment later that evening, "I'm glad you're here. But we need to talk about what happened." I recounted everything: Caroline's insults, the coffee incident, and Liam's complete lack of support. As I spoke, Ethan's expression shifted from concern to anger. "She had no right to treat you that way," he said firmly. "And Liam, he should have stood by you." "I know," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. "But it's not just about the humiliation. There's something else, Ethan. I can feel it. The way Caroline runs the business, the way Liam avoids discussing it. It doesn't add up." Ethan leaned forward, his lawyer instincts kicking in. "What are you saying?" "I don't know yet," I admitted. "But I want to find out. I want to know the truth about them, about the business. If they're hiding something, I need to expose it." Ethan nodded. "Then we'll start digging. But we need to be smart about this. If they're involved in something illegal, it could be dangerous." Over the next few days, Ethan and I came up with a plan. He suggested hiring a private investigator, someone who could look into Liam and Caroline's financial dealings. I agreed, knowing that I wouldn't be able to uncover much on my own. The investigator, a sharp and discreet man named Robert, agreed to take the case. "I'll need some time," he said. "But if there's anything suspicious, I'll find it." While Robert began his work, I decided to focus on my own research. Using the skills I'd honed during my finance degree, I started analyzing public records, financial statements, and anything else I could get my hands on. It wasn't easy. Caroline and Liam were careful to keep their dealings private, but I found small discrepancies, subtle signs that something wasn't right. Ethan was my constant support, guiding me through the legal aspects and keeping me grounded when the frustration became overwhelming. "Barbara," he said one evening, "you're doing the right thing. Don't let them intimidate you." Weeks passed, and then Robert called. "Barbara," he said, his voice serious, "we need to meet. I've found something you'll want to see." When Ethan and I met Robert at his office, he laid out the evidence he'd gathered. Bank statements, offshore accounts, falsified invoices, it was all there. The numbers didn't lie. Caroline and Liam were involved in massive financial fraud. They had been embezzling funds, laundering money through shell companies, and evading taxes for years. As I stared at the evidence, a mix of emotions washed over me. Anger at their deceit, sadness for what could have been, and determination to bring them to justice. "There's more," Robert said, interrupting my thoughts. "It seems Caroline had plans to pin the financial irregularities on you, Barbara. She's already started creating a paper trail to make it look like you were involved." My heart sank. The humiliation, the coffee, the insults, they weren't just acts of cruelty. They were part of a calculated plan to frame me. Ethan placed a hand on my shoulder. "We won't let that happen," he said firmly. "We'll fight this." The next few days were a blur of activity. Ethan and I worked closely with Robert, compiling the evidence into a comprehensive case. I used my finance expertise to trace the flow of money, creating detailed reports that would be impossible to refute. As we prepared to take the case to the authorities, I couldn't help but think about Liam. How much had he known? Was he as deeply involved as Caroline, or had he been manipulated too? The thought of him standing by silently while his mother plotted against me filled me with a sense of betrayal I couldn't shake. One evening, as Ethan and I reviewed the final pieces of evidence, he looked at me and said, "Barbara, are you ready for this? Once we go to the authorities, there's no turning back." I took a deep breath, the weight of everything settling on my shoulders. "I'm ready," I said. "They've taken enough from me. It's time to fight back." The following morning, we submitted the evidence to the federal authorities. It was a nerve-wracking experience. but I felt a sense of relief knowing that the truth was finally coming to light. As we left the federal office, Ethan turned to me. "This isn't over yet," he said. "But you've already won, Barbara. You stood up for yourself. That takes courage." His words stayed with me as we walked away. For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. The battle wasn't over, but I was no longer the helpless victim. I was in control of my story now, and I wasn't going to let Caroline and Liam take that away from me. What I didn't know was that the fight was about to get even more intense, and the secrets we uncovered would shake me to my core. When I decided to take the evidence to the authorities, I thought the hardest part was behind me. But I was wrong. What came next was a whirlwind of revelations, confrontations, and emotions I wasn't prepared for. A few days after submitting the evidence, Ethan and I were contacted by the federal investigators. They needed us to clarify some details and provide context for the documents we'd shared. I sat across from the agents in a sterile, dimly lit room, answering their questions with as much clarity and composure as I could muster. "This is a strong case," one of the agents said, sliding the evidence across the table. "But we'll need your testimony to solidify it. Are you willing to do that?" "Yes," I said without hesitation. "I'll do whatever it takes to make sure they face justice." While the investigation progressed, the authorities began surveilling Caroline and Liam's business activities. Ethan and I were warned to keep everything confidential. "Don't let them suspect anything," one of the agents had said. "We need the element of surprise." It wasn't easy to act as if nothing had changed. Caroline and Liam tried to reach out to me, likely to gauge whether I was still a threat. Liam left several voicemails, his tone switching between guilt and anger. "Barbara, you can't just walk away like this," one message said. "Come home, and let's talk." But I knew better. His words were hollow. He had stood by while his mother humiliated me and plotted to destroy me. There was nothing left to say. Then one evening, something unexpected happened. Robert, our investigator, called with a critical update. "Barbara," he said, his voice urgent, "I've uncovered something bigger. You need to hear this in person." Ethan and I met Robert the next morning at his office. He looked more serious than usual, which made my stomach churn. "Barbara, it turns out the fraud isn't just about money laundering and embezzlement," Robert began. "They've been involved in smuggling, too. We found evidence linking them to an international ring." My mind raced. Smuggling? That was far beyond what I had imagined. Robert handed me a folder. Inside were detailed reports and photographs, transactions for illicit goods, correspondence with shadowy international contacts, and shipment manifests that pointed to illegal activity. "It's not just Caroline and Liam," Robert continued. "They have partners in this. Powerful ones. That's why they've been untouchable for so long." I felt a chill run down my spine. This wasn't just about exposing them, it was about dismantling an entire network of corruption. As the gravity of the situation sank in, I realized how dangerous this had become. But I couldn't back down now. "What happens next?" I asked Ethan. "We take this to the investigators," he said firmly. "But we need to be careful. If Caroline or Liam suspects anything, they might try to retaliate." The following weeks were some of the most nerve-wracking of my life. Federal agents began preparing for a raid on Caroline and Liam's business, gathering the final pieces of evidence. I was kept in the loop but warned to stay low. It was during this time that Liam made one last attempt to manipulate me. He showed up at Ethan's apartment unannounced. I opened the door and froze when I saw him standing there, his face a mixture of desperation and anger. "Barbara," he said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "We need to talk." "There's nothing to talk about," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "You don't understand," he said, his tone softening. "My mother, she's not as bad as you think. She's just protective. She didn't mean to hurt you." I stared at him, disbelief and anger swirling within me. "Not as bad as I think." I shot back. "She threw coffee at me. She humiliated me. And she's trying to frame me for crimes she committed." Liam looked away, his jaw tightening. "I didn't know about that," he admitted. "But you can't let this go any further. You don't know what you're getting into." His words confirmed what I already suspected. He knew about the illegal activities, but he had chosen to stay silent. "I'm done with your lies, Liam," I said, my voice firm. "You and your mother will have to face the consequences." For a moment, he looked as though he wanted to argue, but then he turned and walked out without another word. The raid happened 2 days later. I wasn't there to witness it, but the agents told us it went as planned. Caroline and Liam were arrested on multiple charges, including tax evasion, embezzlement, money laundering, and smuggling. But the most shocking twist came during their interrogation. Caroline had been laying the groundwork to frame me for the financial crimes. She had even falsified emails and documents in my name, creating a narrative that would have made me the perfect scapegoat. When the investigators told me this, I felt a wave of both anger and relief. Anger at her calculated cruelty, and relief that we had stopped her before she could execute her plan. As the news of their arrest spread, their once powerful empire crumbled. Their partners began distancing themselves, and the media exposed every detail of their corruption. But even as I watched their downfall, I knew this wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming my life and proving that I wasn't a victim. I had fought back, and for the first time in a long time, I felt in control of my story. What I didn't anticipate was how deeply their betrayal would continue to haunt me. The battle wasn't just against them. It was against the scars they had left behind. And that was a fight I would have to face alone. The arrests of Caroline and Liam sent shockwaves through their world. Their glamorous facade, the successful business, the influential connections, crumbled under the weight of their crimes. The media swarmed the case, plastering their faces across headlines. The story of their betrayal and illegal activities became the talk of Chicago. But for me, this wasn't a victory parade. It was closure. For weeks after their arrest, I was called in to provide testimony and clarify evidence. Sitting across from federal agents, recounting every detail of my experiences, felt like reliving a nightmare. But I knew it was necessary. I wanted the truth to be heard, not just for my sake, but for everyone they had wronged. The most harrowing part came during the trial. As I sat in the courtroom, Caroline and Liam avoided looking at me. Their lawyers tried to paint them as misunderstood and hard-working businesspeople, but the evidence was undeniable. Bank records, falsified documents, offshore accounts, all of it proved the extent of their crimes. The moment that hit me the hardest was when Liam took the stand. He looked like a shell of the man I had once loved, his arrogance replaced by desperation. Under cross-examination, he admitted to knowing about the illegal activities, but claimed he had been coerced by his mother. "She controls everything," he said, his voice breaking. I didn't know how to stop her. I felt a pang of pity, but it was fleeting. He had choices. He could have stood by me. Instead, he had chosen silence and complicity. The verdict was swift and damning. Caroline and Liam were found guilty on multiple charges, including fraud, tax evasion, and smuggling. Caroline received a 25-year prison sentence, while Liam was sentenced to 15 years. Watching them being led away in handcuffs was a bittersweet moment. After the trial, I felt a strange sense of emptiness. I had fought so hard for justice, and now that it was over, I wasn't sure what came next. For weeks, I stayed with Ethan, trying to process everything. One evening, as we sat in his living room, he said, "Barbara, you've done something incredible. You stood up for yourself and brought down people who thought they were untouchable. But now, it's time to think about you. What do you want for your futures?" His words stayed with me. I realized I had spent so much time fighting the past that I hadn't thought about what came next. Slowly, I began to rebuild. I decided to use my experience to help others. With Ethan's encouragement, I started my own financial consulting firm in New York City. I wanted to help small businesses avoid the traps of corruption and mismanagement that had destroyed Liam's family. The work was fulfilling, but the scars of betrayal lingered. Trust didn't come easily anymore. I kept people at arm's length, afraid of being hurt again. But over time, I found healing in my work and in the support of those who truly cared for me. One day, as I was walking through Central Park, I stopped to reflect on everything that had happened. The pain, the betrayal, the fight for justice, it had all shaped me into the person I was now. stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever. Looking back, I realized that Caroline and Liam's betrayal had taught me something important. It had shown me the value of standing up for myself, of not letting anyone silence my voice. Life didn't turn out the way I had envisioned when I married Liam, but I found something better, a sense of self-worth that no one could take away. As I stood there, watching the sun set over the city, I felt a quiet peace settle over me. The fight was over, and I had won, not just in the courtroom, but in reclaiming my life. This was my story, and it was only just beginning.
The incessant beeping of hospital machines jolted me awake. My eyes fluttered open, struggling to adjust to the harsh fluorescent lights above. Where was I? What happened? The last thing I remembered was feeling dizzy while folding laundry, and then nothing. Mrs. Thompson? Emily? Can you hear me? A gentle voice pierced through my confusion. I turned my head slightly, wincing at the stiffness in my neck, to see a kind-faced nurse standing beside my bed. Yes, I croaked, my throat dry and scratchy. What happened? The nurse smiled sympathetically. You collapsed at home, dear. Your husband brought you in yesterday afternoon. The doctor will be here shortly to discuss your condition. My husband, Scott. Where was he? I scanned the room, but there was no sign of him. No flowers, no get-well card, nothing to indicate he'd been here at all. As if reading my mind, the nurse added, Your husband left shortly after bringing you in. Well, he said he had to get back to work. Of course he did. I shouldn't have expected anything different, but the sting of disappointment was sharp nonetheless. Before I could dwell on it further, a tall man in a white coat entered the room. Mrs. Thompson, I'm Dr. Reeves. How are you feeling? Tired, I admitted. Very, very tired. He nodded, jotting something down on his clipboard. That's to be expected. Emily, we've run some tests, and I believe you're suffering from chronic fatigue syndrome. The words hit me like a ton of bricks. Chronic fatigue syndrome? But I had so much to do. Sarah needed me, the house needed cleaning, Scott's mother needed care. I can't have chronic fatigue syndrome, I protested weakly. I have responsibilities. Dr. Reeves's expression softened. I understand, but your health has to come first. You've been pushing yourself too hard for too long. Your body is telling you to slow down. As the doctor continued explaining the condition and potential treatments, my mind wandered. How would Scott react? Would he finally step up and help more around the house? Would he hire someone to assist with his mother's care? The sound of familiar footsteps in the hallway snapped me back to attention. Scott appeared in the doorway, his face a mask of irritation. There you are, he said, as if I'd inconvenienced him by being hospitalized. When can she come home, Doc? I've got a big presentation tomorrow, and I need her to watch Sarah. Dr. Reeves frowned. Mr. Thompson, your wife is very ill. She needs rest and support, not additional stress. Scott waved his hand dismissively. She's always tired. A little rest and she'll be fine, right, Em? I stared at him, speechless. How could he be so callous? Where was the man I'd fallen in love with, the one who'd promised to support me through thick and thin? Scott, I began, my voice trembling. Didn't you hear what the doctor said? I'm sick. I need help. He rolled his eyes. Come on, Emily. We all get tired sometimes. You just need to push through it. Push through it? I echoed, anger rising in my chest. I've been pushing through it for years, taking care of your mother, raising our daughter, managing the house, all while you focus on your precious career. I can't do it anymore, Scott. I won't. The room fell silent. Dr. Reeves cleared his throat awkwardly. Perhaps we should continue this discussion later. Mrs. Thompson needs her rest. Scott shrugged. Fine. I'll be back tomorrow to pick you up, figure out what to do about Sarah. With that, he turned and left, not even bothering to say goodbye. As the door closed behind him, I felt something inside me snap. Tears welled up in my eyes, a mixture of frustration, anger, and despair. How had my life come to this? When had my loving husband turned into this uncaring stranger? I closed my eyes, exhaustion washing over me. One thing was certain. Things couldn't go on like this. Something had to change, and soon. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of a journey that would test my strength, reshape my life, and ultimately lead me to rediscover myself. As I lay in my hospital bed, memories of happier times flooded my mind. I couldn't help but think back to the day Scott and I got married, how full of hope and love we were. Where had it all gone wrong? The turning point came 5 years ago, just after Sarah was born. I was still on maternity leave when we got the call that changed everything. "Emily, it's Mom," Scott's voice cracked over the phone. "She's had a stroke. The doctors, they don't know if she'll recover fully." My heart sank. "Oh, Scott, I'm so sorry. What can I do?" There was a long pause before he replied, "We need to talk about our options." That night, as Sarah slept peacefully in her crib, Scott and I had a conversation that would alter the course of our lives. "I think one of us needs to stay home to take care of Mom," Scott said, pacing our bedroom. "She can't be alone, and a nursing home is out of the question." I nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. "Of course. But what about our jobs? We can't afford to lose both incomes." Scott ran his hand through his hair, a gesture I'd come to recognize as a sign of stress. "I've been thinking about that. My job pays more, and I'm up for a promotion soon. Maybe you could take a leave of absence, just until Mom's better?" I hesitated. I loved my job at the marketing firm, and Leonard had been such a supportive boss, but family came first, right? "Okay," I said slowly. "I can do that, but just temporarily, right?" Scott's face lit up with relief. He pulled me into a tight hug. "You're amazing, Em. I promise we'll make it work. I'll support you every step of the way." Oh, how naive I was to believe those words. The first few months were challenging but manageable. I juggled caring for Sarah and Scott's mother, keeping the house in order, and trying to maintain some semblance of a social life. Scott seemed appreciative, often bringing home flowers or taking us out for dinner on weekends. But as time wore on, things began to change. Scott's promised support dwindled. He started working later, claiming his new position demanded more of his time. Weekends that were once reserved for family became filled with important golf outings with clients. One evening, as I was preparing dinner with Sarah clinging to my leg and my mother-in-law calling for help from the other room, Scott walked in, loosening his tie. "Honey, can you grab me a beer? I've had a hell of a day," he called out, collapsing on the couch. I felt something snap inside me. "Scott, I could use a hand here. Can you please check on your mother while I finish dinner?" He looked at me as if I'd grown a second head. "Em, I've been working all day. I'm exhausted. Can't you handle it?" I stared at him, speechless. Handle it? I'd been handling it for months without a break, without so much as a thank you. "Scott," I began, trying to keep my voice steady. "We agreed this would be temporary. It's been almost a year. When can I start looking for a job again?" He frowned, avoiding my gaze. "We can't afford a caregiver for Mom, Em, and you're doing such a great job with her and Sarah. It just makes sense for you to stay home." "But what about my career? My independence?" I protested, feeling a lump form in my throat. Scott stood up, his expression hardening. "Don't be selfish, Emily. Family comes first, remember? We're doing fine on my salary. You should be grateful you don't have to work." Grateful? The word hit me like a slap in the face. I watched in stunned silence as Scott grabbed his beer and retreated to his home office, leaving me alone with a crying toddler and a pot threatening to boil over. As I stirred the pasta sauce, trying to blink back tears, I realized with a sinking heart that this was my new reality. The support Scott had promised had evaporated, leaving me trapped in a life I never signed up for. Little did I know, things were about to get even worse. I thought I'd hit rock bottom, but life had other plans. Just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, Scott dropped another bombshell on me. "Em, Grace is moving in with us," he announced one morning, not even looking up from his phone. I nearly choked on my coffee. "What? Why?" Scott sighed, as if I was being difficult. "She's going through a tough time, lost her job, broke up with her boyfriend. She needs a place to stay for a while." "And you didn't think to discuss this with me first?" I asked, trying to keep my voice level. He finally looked at me, his expression a mixture of annoyance and dismissal. "It's my sister, Emily. What was there to discuss?" I bit my tongue, knowing any argument would fall on deaf ears. But inside, I was screaming. How was I supposed to manage another person in this house? Grace arrived the next day, suitcases in tow, and not a word of thanks. From the moment she stepped through the door, it was clear she had no intention of making things easier for me. "Emily, be a dear and take my bags upstairs," she said, breezing past me to plop herself on the couch. I stared at her in disbelief. Grace, I'm in the middle of making lunch for Sarah and your mother. Could you maybe— Oh, come on, she interrupted, rolling her eyes. It's not like you have anything else to do all day. I felt my cheeks burn with anger and humiliation. Is that what they all thought? That I just sat around eating bonbons while magically keeping the house clean and everyone fed and cared for? Days turned into weeks, and Grace showed no signs of looking for a job or contributing to the household in any way. Instead, she criticized everything I did, from how I folded laundry to the meals I prepared. One afternoon, as I was trying to coax Sarah into eating her vegetables while simultaneously helping Scott's mother with her physical therapy exercises, Grace sauntered into the kitchen. Emily, where's my blue blouse? I told you I needed it clean for my lunch date tomorrow. I took a deep breath, counting to 10 in my head. Grace, I haven't had time to do laundry today. I've been a bit busy, as you can see. She scoffed. Busy? Please, you're home all day. How hard can it be to throw in a load of laundry? Something inside me snapped. How hard can it be? Are you kidding me? I'm taking care of a 4-year-old and an elderly woman with health issues. I'm cooking, cleaning, doing therapy exercises, managing doctor's appointments, and a million other things. And you have the audacity to complain about your laundry? Grace looked taken aback by my outburst. Well, I just thought. No, you didn't think, I cut her off. None of you do. You all just take and take, and I'm expected to give and give until there's nothing left of me. The room fell silent. Sarah looked up at me with wide, confused eyes. Scott's mother shifted uncomfortably in her chair, and Grace just stared at me like I'd grown a second head. Just then, Scott walked in, oblivious to the tension in the room. Hey, what's for dinner? I'm starving. I looked at him, then at Grace, then back at the mess of half-eaten vegetables on Sarah's plate. Something inside me crumbled. Make your own dinner, I said quietly, my voice shaking. I'm done. I turned and walked out of the kitchen, ignoring the chorus of confused voices behind me. I climbed the stairs, each step feeling heavier than the last. When I reached our bedroom, I closed the door and sank to the floor, my back against the wall. As tears streamed down my face, I realized I couldn't go on like this. Something had to give, and if I didn't make a change soon, that something would be me. But how could I possibly fix this mess I'd found myself in? Little did I know, my breaking point was just around the corner, and it would force everyone to confront the reality of our situation head-on. The days following my breakdown blurred together in a haze of exhaustion and resentment. I went through the motions, caring for Sarah and Scott's mother, but I felt like a ghost in my own home. Scott and Grace carried on as if nothing had happened, their indifference a constant reminder of my invisibility. One morning, as I was preparing breakfast, a wave of dizziness hit me. I gripped the kitchen counter, trying to steady myself, but the room kept spinning. I heard Sarah's voice, distant and muffled, calling Mommy. Then, darkness. I woke up in a hospital bed, the familiar beeping of machines surrounding me. A nurse was adjusting my IV, her face etched with concern. What happened? I croaked, my throat dry and scratchy. You collapsed at home, Mrs. Thompson. Your daughter called 911. You've been unconscious for almost 24 hours. My heart raced. Sarah, where was she? And Scott's mother? Who was taking care of them? As if reading my mind, the nurse added, Your husband brought your daughter to visit earlier. They've gone home now. Of course they had. Heaven forbid Scott miss a day of work to be with his hospitalized wife. Dr. Reeves entered the room, his expression grave. Emily, I'm afraid your condition has worsened. Your body is showing signs of severe stress and exhaustion. We need to discuss some lifestyle changes. I laughed bitterly. Lifestyle changes? Doctor? You don't understand. I can't just— You can, and you must, he interrupted firmly. If you continue like this, you're risking permanent damage to your health. As Dr. Reeves outlined a treatment plan, tears welled up in my eyes. How could I possibly follow his advice? Who would take care of everyone if I didn't? A soft knock on the door interrupted our conversation. To my surprise, my mother, Margaret, walked in. Oh, Emily, she gasped, rushing to my bedside. Why didn't you call me sooner? I broke down then, years of pent-up frustration and pain pouring out. Margaret held me, stroking my hair like she did when I was a child. It's okay, sweetheart, she murmured. I'm here now. We'll figure this out together. Over the next few days, Margaret became my rock. She listened without judgment as I poured out the whole sordid story. Scott's broken promises, Grace's entitled behavior, the constant demands that had driven me to this breaking point. "Emily," she said finally, her voice filled with a mix of sadness and determination, "this can't go on. You need to stand up for yourself." "But how?" I whispered, feeling more helpless than ever. "I have nowhere to go, no job, no money of my own." Margaret squeezed my hand. "That's not true. You have me, and you're stronger than you know." Just then, Scott and Grace burst into the room, their faces twisted with annoyance rather than concern. "Emily, this has gone on long enough," Scott declared. "We need you back home. Things are falling apart without you." Grace nodded in agreement. "Honestly, Emily, I don't know why you're making such a big deal out of this. We all get tired sometimes." I stared at them, shocked by their callousness. But before I could respond, Margaret stood up, her eyes flashing with anger. "How dare you?" she hissed. "Your wife, your sister-in-law, is lying in a hospital bed, and all you can think about is your own convenience?" Scott and Grace looked taken aback, clearly not used to being challenged. "Now listen here," Scott began, but Margaret cut him off. "No, you listen. This ends now. Emily is coming home with me when she's discharged. You two can figure out how to manage on your own for a change." As Scott and Grace sputtered in protest, I felt a surge of something I hadn't experienced in years. Hope. For the first time in so long, I wasn't alone in this fight. I looked at my mother, then back at Scott and Grace. In that moment, I made a decision that would change everything. "She's right," I said, my voice stronger than I expected. "I'm done being your doormat. It's time for things to change." The look of shock on their faces would have been comical if the situation wasn't so serious. As they stormed out of the room, hurling threats and insults, I realized the real battle was just beginning. But with my mother by my side, I finally felt ready to fight. The day I was discharged from the hospital felt like the first day of a new life. With Margaret by my side, I packed my bags and left without a word to Scott or Grace. Their absence spoke volumes about where I stood in their priorities. As we drove to my mother's house, I felt a mix of relief and anxiety. "What about Sarah?" I asked, my voice trembling. Margaret squeezed my hand. "We'll get her, sweetheart. One step at a time." Over the next few days, I focused on regaining my strength, while Margaret helped me strategize. We knew confronting Scott and Grace wouldn't be easy, but we never anticipated the bombshell that was about to drop. It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Emily, it's Leonard, your old boss. We need to talk. It's important." My heart raced as I dialed his number. "Leonard? What's going on?" His voice was grave. "Emily, I've heard some disturbing things about Scott and Grace's behavior at work. I think you need to know." What Leonard revealed next left me reeling. Apparently, Scott and Grace had been spreading malicious rumors about me at their workplace, painting me as unstable and attention-seeking. They'd used my illness as an excuse for their own poor performance and frequent absences. "I'm so sorry, Emily," Leonard said. "I had no idea things had gotten this bad for you." Tears streamed down my face as I hung up. The betrayal cut deep, but it also ignited a fire within me. No more playing the victim. "Mom," I called out, my voice steadier than it had been in years. "We need to act now." Together, we crafted a plan. With Leonard's help, we compiled evidence of Scott and Grace's misconduct, including emails and witness statements. Then we contacted their company's HR department. The response was swift and decisive. Within days, both Scott and Grace were suspended pending an investigation. The news spread quickly, and suddenly, my phone was buzzing with messages of support from old colleagues and friends. But the real test came when Scott showed up at Margaret's house, his face a mask of fury. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he shouted as I opened the door. "You're ruining everything." I stood my ground, looking him straight in the eye. "No, Scott, you did that all on your own." He tried to push past me, but Margaret appeared, standing tall beside me. "You need to leave, Scott," she said firmly, "unless you want us to call the police." As he stormed off, hurling threats and insults, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. For the first time in years, I was standing up for myself. But our victory was short-lived. The next day, I received a call from my lawyer. Scott was filing for full custody of Sarah, claiming I was an unfit mother due to my health issues. My world tilted on its axis. The thought of losing Sarah was unbearable. I collapsed onto the couch, my breath coming in short gasps. Margaret sat beside me, her arm around my shoulders. "Emily, listen to me. We're not going to let this happen. You're a wonderful mother, and we have proof of Scott's negligence. We'll fight this." I looked up at her, drawing strength from her unwavering support. "You're right," I said, wiping away my tears. "I've come too far to give up now." In that moment, I made a decision that would change the course of our lives forever. I wasn't just going to fight for custody. I was going to expose Scott and Grace for who they truly were. I picked up my phone and dialed Leonard's number. "Leonard, it's Emily. I need your help one more time. It's time to tell our story." As I hung up, I felt a mix of fear and determination. The road ahead would be tough, but for the first time in years, I felt truly alive. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about standing up for every person who'd ever been silenced or taken for granted. The battle was far from over, but I was ready to fight. And this time, I wouldn't be fighting alone. The day of the custody hearing arrived with a suffocating tension. As I sat in the courthouse waiting room, my hands trembled despite Margaret's reassuring presence beside me. Scott and Grace hadn't arrived yet, but their absence only heightened my anxiety. "You've got this, Emily," Margaret whispered, squeezing my hand. "Remember, we have the truth on our side." I nodded, trying to draw strength from her words. Just then, the doors burst open and Scott strode in with Grace close behind. Their faces were masks of cold determination, and my heart sank at the sight. "Emily," Scott sneered, his voice dripping with disdain, "I hope you're ready to say goodbye to Sarah. No judge in their right mind would grant custody to someone as unstable as you." Before I could respond, Grace chimed in. "Really, Emily, this whole charade is pathetic. Just give up now and save everyone the trouble." I felt my resolve wavering under their cruel words, but Margaret stood up, her eyes flashing with anger. "That's enough, both of you. You should be ashamed of yourselves." Scott opened his mouth to retort, but was interrupted by a familiar voice behind us. I couldn't agree more. We all turned to see Leonard standing there, a portfolio tucked under his arm and a determined expression on his face. "Leonard?" Scott sputtered, his composure cracking. "What are you doing here?" Leonard stepped forward, placing a supportive hand on my shoulder. "I'm here to make sure the truth comes out, Scott. All of it." The color drained from Scott and Grace's faces as Leonard began to speak. He detailed their workplace misconduct, the lies they'd spread about me, and the evidence he'd gathered of their neglect and emotional abuse. "I have sworn statements from colleagues," Leonard continued, his voice steady and clear. "They all attest to Scott and Grace's behavior and the toll it took on Emily. Not to mention the records of Emily's medical condition, directly resulting from the stress they put her under." Scott's face contorted with rage. "You can't do this," he shouted, lunging towards Leonard. In that moment, everything seemed to move in slow motion. I saw Scott's fist flying towards Leonard's face, heard Margaret's gasp of shock, and felt a surge of adrenaline course through my body. Without thinking, I stepped between them, my hand shooting up to catch Scott's wrist mid-air. "Stop!" I commanded, my voice stronger than I'd ever heard it. The room fell silent, all eyes on us. Scott stared at me, shock and confusion replacing his anger. "This ends now," I said, my voice shaking but resolute. "I'm not your punching bag anymore, Scott. I'm not your maid, or your scapegoat, or your doormat. I'm a person, a mother, and I deserve respect." I turned to face the stunned onlookers, including our lawyer and the court officials who had rushed in at the commotion. "This is who they really are," I declared, gesturing to Scott and Grace. "Bullies who resort to violence when they don't get their way. Is this really who you think should have custody of a child?" The silence that followed was deafening. Then, slowly, people began to nod. I saw looks of sympathy and understanding replace the doubt and skepticism that had been there before. As security guards approached to escort Scott and Grace out, I felt a wave of exhaustion wash over me. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving me feeling drained and vulnerable. But as I looked around at the supportive faces of Margaret, Leonard, and even strangers who had witnessed the scene, I realized something profound. I wasn't alone anymore. I had found my voice, and people were finally listening. As we were called into the courtroom, Margaret squeezed my hand one last time. "You did it, Emily," she whispered. No matter what happens now, you've already won. I took a deep breath and stepped forward, ready to face whatever came next. The battle wasn't over, but for the first time, I truly believed I could win. The courtroom felt like a battlefield as I took the stand. Scott's lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman in a crisp suit, approached with a predatory smile. "Mrs. Thompson," she began, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "You claim my client has been neglectful, yet you willingly quit your job to care for his mother. Wasn't that your choice?" I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of everyone's eyes on me. "It was a decision we made together," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "Scott promised to support me. He didn't." The lawyer's smile tightened. "And yet you never sought employment again. Isn't it true that you became dependent on my client?" I felt a flash of anger. I was caring for his mother, our daughter, and managing our home. That is work, even if it's unpaid. As the questioning continued, I could see Scott and Grace whispering to each other, smug smiles on their faces. But I refused to let them intimidate me. I recounted every broken promise, every dismissive comment, every moment I felt invisible in my own home. When it was our turn, Leonard took the stand. He presented emails, performance reviews, and witness statements that painted a damning picture of Scott and Grace's behavior at work and their lies about me. "Your Honor," Leonard concluded, his voice firm, "Emily Thompson is not only a capable and loving mother, but also a victim of prolonged emotional abuse and neglect." The judge's expression was unreadable as she called for a recess. As we filed out of the courtroom, I felt a mix of hope and terror. Had we done enough? In the hallway, Scott cornered me, his face twisted with rage. "You think you've won?" he hissed. "I'll make sure you never see Sarah again. You're nothing without me, Emily. Nothing." I stood my ground, even as my heart raced. "You're wrong, Scott. I'm everything I need to be, with or without you." Just then, Margaret appeared at my side, her presence a shield against Scott's venom. "Step away from my daughter," she warned, her voice low and dangerous. As Scott retreated, I felt a surge of gratitude for my mother's unwavering support. But the moment was short-lived as we were called back into the courtroom. The judge's decision felt like it took an eternity. With each passing second, my anxiety grew. What if she didn't believe me? What if I lost Sarah? "In the matter of custody," the judge began, her voice echoing in the silent courtroom, "I find in favor of the plaintiff, Emily Thompson." The world seemed to stop. I heard Margaret's gasp of joy, saw Scott's face contort in disbelief, but it all felt distant, unreal. "Furthermore," the judge continued, "given the evidence presented, I'm granting Mrs. Thompson's petition for divorce on grounds of emotional cruelty. Mr. Thompson will pay alimony and child support as outlined in the settlement proposal." As the reality of the judge's words sank in, I felt a tidal wave of emotions threaten to overwhelm me. Relief, joy, vindication, but also a deep, aching sadness for the life I had lost and the years I could never get back. Outside the courtroom, as reporters clamored for statements and Scott and Grace skulked away in defeat, I turned to Margaret and Leonard. "Thank you," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. "I couldn't have done this without you." Margaret pulled me into a fierce hug. "You did this, Emily. You found your strength." Leonard nodded, smiling warmly. "You've got a bright future ahead, Emily, and if you ever want to return to work, there's a place for you at the company." As we walked out of the courthouse, I felt like I was stepping into a new world. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in years, I felt hope. I had my daughter, my freedom, and a chance to rediscover who Emily Thompson really was. The battle was over, but my journey was just beginning. And this time, I was ready to face whatever came next, on my own terms. 6 months after the divorce, I stood in front of the mirror, hardly recognizing the woman staring back at me. Gone were the dark circles under my eyes and the perpetual look of exhaustion. In their place was a spark of life I hadn't seen in years. "Mommy, are you ready?" Sarah called from the living room, her voice filled with excitement. I smiled, adjusting my blouse one last time. "Coming, sweetie." As we drove to Sarah's first day of kindergarten, I marveled at how much had changed. With the settlement from the divorce, I'd been able to buy a small house for us, close to my mother and in a good school district. I'd even started working part-time at Leonard's company, slowly rebuilding my career. Dropping Sarah off at school, I felt a pang of emotion. "Have a great day, honey," I said, hugging her tight. Mommy loves you. As I watched her skip into the classroom, I realized how far we'd both come. No longer was she the timid child afraid of her father's mood swings. She was blossoming, free from the tension that had once filled our home. Returning home, I found a familiar car parked in my driveway. My heart sank as I saw Scott leaning against it, a bouquet of flowers in his hand. "Emily," he said as I approached, his voice uncharacteristically soft. "Can we talk?" I hesitated, then nodded, leading him to the porch. We sat in silence for a moment before he spoke. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," Scott began. "And I'm sorry for everything. I was a terrible husband and father. I took you for granted, and I see that now." I listened, my emotions a swirling mix of anger, sadness, and a tiny flicker of the love we once shared. "I've changed," he continued, hope creeping into his voice. "I've been going to therapy, working on myself. I want us to try again, for Sarah's sake, and for ours." For a moment, I was tempted. The idea of a whole family, of the life I'd once dreamed of, dangled tantalizingly before me. But then I remembered. The lonely nights, the constant criticism, the feeling of invisibility. I remembered the strength it took to stand up for myself, to build this new life. "No, Scott," I said firmly, surprising myself with the steadiness of my voice. "I'm glad you're working on yourself, truly, but we can't go back. I've moved on, and so should you." His face fell, a mix of disappointment and anger flashing in his eyes. For a second, I saw the old Scott, the one who would lash out when he didn't get his way. But instead, he nodded slowly. "I understand. I hope someday you can forgive me." As I watched him drive away, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The last tie to my old life had been severed, and I was truly free. That evening, as Sarah and I sat at our little dining table, eating dinner and giggling over her stories from school, I felt a profound sense of peace wash over me. "Mommy," Sarah said suddenly, her little face serious, "are you happy now?" I looked at her, this beautiful child who had been my anchor through the storm, and felt tears prick my eyes. "Yes, sweetheart," I replied, my voice thick with emotion. "Mommy is very happy." Later, as I tucked Sarah into bed, I thought about the journey we'd been on. The pain, the struggle, the moments of despair, but also the triumph, the rediscovery of my strength, and the unbreakable bond I'd formed with my daughter. I realized then that this wasn't just an ending. It was a beginning, a chance to write a new story, one where I was the author of my own happiness. As I closed Sarah's bedroom door, I whispered a quiet thank you to the universe. For the challenges that had shaped me, for the people who had supported me, and for the strength I'd found within myself. Tomorrow was a new day, full of possibilities, and for the first time in years, I couldn't wait to see what it would bring.
Oh, funeral preparations are tough, and my wife is so useless. What am I going to do? Really, it is tough, isn't it? What did she come here as a wife for? That day was my father-in-law's funeral. My husband and mother-in-law had not helped with any preparations and had left everything to me. However, as relatives began to gather, they slandered me, claiming all the work as their own achievement. Moreover, my husband's unbelievable actions continued even further. "Hey, why are you trying to take out the condolence money?" I couldn't help but reprimand him for his unreasonable behavior, to which he responded, "Shut up. It's none of your business. You're not family or anything, so don't butt in." "What do you mean I'm not family? We are married. Tom and I got married 13 years ago. At that time, Tom, his parents, and our 3-year-old son were all kind to me. That's why I wanted to support him after marrying. However, after getting married, the 4 of us changed completely. Tom became extremely bossy. He decided on his own to live with his parents, who treated me like a maid and bullied me. Even my son, influenced by his father and grandparents, began to ridicule me. I endured such a life for 13 years. During my father-in-law's funeral, I was shocked by my husband's words and reached my limit. I did not attend the funeral and left a divorce paper disappearing in front of them. The following day, there were as many as 203 missed calls from Tom. Listening to the messages in disbelief, I heard him panicking. "Hey, where are you now?" Then, I called my husband and began to fight back. "I am Hillary, a 40-year-old housewife, working part-time at a nearby supermarket. My husband, Tom, works for a travel agency, and he has a son, Ryan, from a previous marriage. I married him 13 years ago. At that time, I wanted to support him as he was raising his 3-year-old son alone. Before marriage, I worked at a travel agency. 14 years ago, a male employee joined the company through mid-career recruitment. I'll be under your care from today. I look forward to working with you all." That man would later become my husband, but at the time, he seemed like a very refreshing man. "Hillary, I heard from others that you are well versed in this job. Can you teach me?" "Of course, I'd be happy to. When you change jobs, the way things are done changes too, and I imagine that can be confusing." However, Tom was proactive in asking questions and worked hard to learn the job. "Hillary, I'm free right now, so I'll take care of this task." "Really? Thank you. That's a big help." Tom approached his job with a serious attitude, so he learned quickly. As he became proficient, his work speed increased, and he was able to help me with my tasks, which made me feel reassured about his reliability. "Wow, Tom, you're raising a child on your own and working hard too? Isn't it tough?" "But I have to protect Ryan as a parent. I need to fulfill my responsibilities." "You're kind, but make sure not to overdo it, okay?" As he became accustomed to the work, we started having conversations beyond that, and I learned that he was a hard-working single father. Next holiday, I'm taking Ryan to the park. "Hillary, would you like to join us? It'd give Ryan a taste of what having a mother might be like." "Are you sure I'm okay for that?" "Absolutely. I think you're the best for it. If you say so, I'm happy to join." While we couldn't date alone because of his child, we deepened our relationship by going out together on holidays and having meals at his home. The food Mom makes is delicious. Oh, but calling me Mom makes me blush. I'm not your mom yet. Why don't you become his mom? I think Ryan needs a mother. Are you serious? While the three of us had a good time, Tom's words might have come out in such a natural way. Although it was a surprise to me, I was genuinely happy since I hoped that was the case. "With pleasure, if it's okay with you." Thus, I decided to marry him and become Ryan's mother. This was 1 year after Tom joined the company. And upon marriage, I quit the travel agency to focus on home life. My parents had already died in an accident, and I had an older brother. At that time, my brother had already started his own business and was living abroad, so I couldn't tell him in person and informed him over the phone. "You've met a good person. That's great. You definitely must be happy." "Yeah, thank you." My brother gladly gave his blessings, and I was happy. After reporting to my brother, it was time to inform my in-laws, which was nerve-wracking, but Tom was reassuring. "Don't be so nervous. They'll definitely accept you since I chose you." That makes me feel more confident. We entered my in-laws' home, and I met them face to face. I'm Hillary. I married Tom. Nice to meet you. Hello, Hillary. It's a relief you married our son. I have been thinking it's tough raising a child with only a father. Thank you so much. I was happy because my in-laws accepted the marriage smoothly, as Tom had said. I'm happy to be with Mom forever now. Ryan said that, smiling innocently. Thus, I ended up with kind in-laws, a husband, and a sweet son. Looking back, that might have been the happiest moment for me. I was certain that a happy married life awaited me. But what awaited me was an unexpected turn of events. My husband, who had previously been kind, suddenly changed. Hey, make sure you iron my shirts by tomorrow morning. Okay, I understand. Also, I'll be home by 7 p.m. tomorrow, so make sure that freshly made dinner is ready. He started to act like a lord of the house, giving orders more frequently. I thought, do men change after getting married? While I thought I could still endure this level of change, one day, my husband said something outrageous. Hey, I've just arranged for us to live with my parents. What? I wasn't informed about living together. Why should I need your permission? I'm the head of the family. Do you understand? I do, but suddenly, he had even decided that we would live with his parents. I was confused and returned his words, but his arrogant attitude left no room for rebuttal. Besides, Ryan is happy about living with his grandparents, so you can't disregard his feelings. When he mentioned our son, I couldn't argue back, and I reluctantly accepted living with my in-laws. But it wasn't just my husband who had changed. My in-laws were the same. Since Hillary is living with us, you can take it easy now. Yes, I'll do that. Hillary, I'm leaving the household chores to you. Yes, I understand. I thought I would be sharing household duties with my mother-in-law, but instead, all chores were assigned to me. As long as you live here, you must listen to us. If you defy us, we'll tell Tom. Whatever you say, Tom will always believe us, you know. Under this pressure, I struggled with the household duties. What's with this seasoning? Have you been serving this to Tom and Ryan all this time? But both of them have never complained about the taste before. They were just being considerate of you. You should realize that. Criticism of my household duties wasn't limited to cooking. What's with this way of folding clothes? And look, there's still dust here. Did you really clean? I did clean as best as I could. No matter what I did, it was never good enough, and I lived under constant criticism, being bullied as an incompetent wife for 13 years. During that time, my mother-in-law never helped with the chores even once. Saying I was treated like a maid would not be an exaggeration. Unable to endure such a life, I thought about divorce several times. However, what kept me from it was my son. I thought, I must fulfill my role as a parent until Ryan becomes an adult. That thought kept me from divorcing, despite the endurance. However, I was painfully aware of the bad influence my husband and in-laws' attitudes had on my son when an incident occurred. Why can't Mom do anything right? What? Ryan, what's suddenly gotten into you? Grandpa and Grandma said so. It's really pathetic. You should be more responsible as a parent. Ryan, how can you say such things to your parent? I couldn't believe that my once sincere and adorable son could say such things. I was not only shocked by his change, but also I was already dealing with another issue at that time, which was the health of my father-in-law. In fact, a few years ago, my father-in-law became ill and needed care. Hey, I'm the head of the family, and Mom is getting old. You know what to do about Dad, right? Are you implying that? Exactly that. You take care of him. But I'm already busy with part-time work and household chores. Can't you help a little? However, Tom responded angrily. Shut up. Don't argue with me. I'm the one earning the money that keeps us living. I thought, that's a terrible thing to say. I thought it was useless to say anything more. My husband's attitude was the worst. With this background, I continued my life juggling part-time work, household chores, and caregiving alone. As a result, my body became worn out, and I lost even the energy and margin to think about divorcing. Then, my father-in-law fell ill again and passed away. Oh, funeral preparations are tough. Hey, Hillary, you take care of everything. Yes, as a daughter-in-law, it's only natural for you to do that. Understood. I had a feeling it would turn out this way, but sure enough, my husband and mother-in-law left all the funeral preparations to me. What was worse was what happened next. When the relatives who attended expressed their condolences for the sudden loss, they praised my husband and mother-in-law for managing the funeral, and the two acted as if they had handled all the arrangements. Well, it couldn't be helped, but I didn't think arranging a funeral would be so hard. Yes, it was a big help that Tom worked together with me. While some voices did commend me as a good daughter-in-law, the two slandered and mocked me. Oh, that one is no good. She's a useless wife who can't even handle this. She could at least be useful at a time like this. Hearing and seeing that, even the relatives were appalled. I thought, why have I tried so hard up to this point? Despite having devotedly served my husband and mother-in-law as they demanded, it was all unrewarded. I was truly disgusted with the situation. My husband's shocking behavior continued. Tom, what are you doing? What? Don't raise your voice. It's annoying. It's not just annoying. Why are you trying to take out the condolence money? I never thought he would do something so unreasonable. While I was stunned, I couldn't ignore such behavior, so I had to call him out. Shut up. It's none of your business, so stay out of it. You're not family, so don't interfere. What do you mean I'm not family? We're married. I couldn't believe what he said. I had been treated like a maid by my in-laws, but to think that my husband also saw me that way, despite being his wife, which means I am family, the fact that he didn't recognize that was shocking. So you say such things. I've had enough. At this point, continuing to endure seemed foolish, so I decided not to attend my father-in-law's funeral and returned home. I packed my bags, left a divorce paper, and went to a certain person's place. The following day, I checked my phone and thought, wow, what is this? I saw a history of missed calls from my husband. There were as many as 203. Not only had he left a history of calls, but also messages. As I listened, shocked, I heard, "Hey, Hillary, where the heck are you?" His voice sounded frantic and panicky. "The funeral is about to start. It's bad. Come back quickly." Despite his previous arrogance, it seemed he couldn't manage anything without me. Reluctantly, I called my husband, who seemed to have been waiting so eagerly. He picked up the phone promptly. "Finally, you decided to call. Hey, why didn't you attend the funeral?" "Why? You should ask yourself that. You're insolent for a wife. I won't forgive you for embarrassing me. Wasn't it fine without me?" My brother attended in my place. Indeed, my brother had attended the funeral in my place. As I mentioned this, my husband became even more flustered. "That was the problem. You must have badmouthed us to your brother." "Not at all. I only spoke the truth." "I knew it. And your brother discussed it in front of the relatives. Thanks to that, both Mom and I were reproached by everyone." "That's your own doing. If the relatives had any sense, they would naturally be upset knowing what my husband and mother-in-law had done. I really can't understand why they don't see that. Not only had they caused a commotion at the funeral, but what added insult to injury was what happened after they returned. When we got back from the funeral, there was a divorce paper." "Are you serious about this?" "Yes, I'm serious. Of course," I answered clearly, showing my strong intention to divorce. "Don't joke. I will never allow a divorce. You just need to shut up and listen to me." Even after all this, he said such things. It felt like he was completely oblivious to the reasons for the divorce and truly beyond help. "I'm done being at the mercy of you and your mother. I won't be coming back." "What did you say?" "Make sure to fill out the divorce papers properly. Bye." I firmly told my husband this originally belonged to my parents, and now it's under my brother's name. "What are you talking about?" In fact, the house we had been living in was one my brother had lent to me. My husband and in-laws had misunderstood, thinking it was a house that I had inherited from my parents. That's why they thought they could live there, as if it was their own. This situation dates back to when my father-in-law died. When I informed my brother about the funeral, he was still abroad. But when I mentioned the funeral, he said he would come back and attend. We met for the first time in years before the funeral. "Hillary, are you okay? You look so worn out. What happened?" "Well, actually, it had been years since I had seen my brother, but he was shocked at how different I looked. Concerned, he approached me, and I honestly explained everything that had happened. What a thing to say. I won't forgive anyone who hurts my dear sister." His expression was stern, and he clenched his fists, shaking with anger. "Hillary, don't worry. I'll take care of it." "Thank you." Thus, with my brother's support, I was able to firm up my decision to divorce my husband. Now, get back to the present. I was talking with my mother-in-law on the phone, and I decided to reveal a certain fact. I've decided to live near my brother from now on. "What?" As I said this, my mother-in-law sounded shocked. It seemed that Tom was nearby, and taking over from the silent mother-in-law, he spoke up. "Hillary, don't say things like that. Let's start over. I'm reflecting on it all." "What are you saying all of a sudden? It's absurd. I can't even consider getting back together with you." I'm serious. I'm your husband, after all. Can't you trust what your husband says? What made him think he could be trusted after all the trust-destroying actions he had taken? Moreover, the situation had changed since before, and I decided to tell him about it. Listen, Tom. Another reason it's impossible to get back together is that I'm not in the US right now. What? What do you mean? As I spoke coldly, Tom anxiously asked for clarification. Do you think my brother is permanently back in the US to live? Isn't that what it means when you say you're going to live near your brother? He had interpreted it that way, thinking according to his convenience without being told anything. I was really astonished at his way of thinking. I've changed my nationality and moved to Cancun. Huh? You moved to Cancun? Yes, that's right. My brother is in the US only temporarily. He didn't come back to live here permanently. No way. As I spoke, Tom sounded surprised and shocked. There was no longer any reason to continue the conversation with him. I decided to tell him one last thing. Right now, my brother is staying in the US to handle various procedures, so please ask him about anything else. After saying that, I ended the conversation and hung up. Later, I was able to hear from my brother about Tom. He did enough to deserve a divorce, yet he hesitated to sign the divorce papers. I wondered how stubborn he could be. Really? But in the end, did he sign the divorce papers? He wouldn't have signed them if it were just up to me to convince him. I had no choice but to involve a lawyer. The lawyer you hired was very competent, wasn't he? That makes me feel relieved. As I asked, my brother nodded and told me that everything had smoothly progressed, with the divorce papers signed. Then my brother sold our family home. When asked where the three of them ended up after losing their home, the response was like this. After I sold the family home, they had nowhere to live. Now, they're living in a rundown apartment, all three of them. Wow, that's tragic, but it's really just a case of reaping what they sowed. While it seemed tragic to hear about their situation, there was no room for sympathy. If they had remained as kind as they were before the marriage, things would not have ended this way. Ryan could have grown up properly too. It's too late to say such things now, but it's good that you had been recording videos on your smartphone and writing diaries. I really wished they would have reformed without my having to do such things. But maybe they would never have changed regardless. At least, that's what I think. After all, they have caused you so much suffering. What you did was hardly a punishment. True to my brother's words, I had been writing in a diary and secretly recording videos on my smartphone about the things my husband and in-laws did to me. When I submitted these as evidence to the lawyer, they were acknowledged as powerful evidence. As a result, I succeeded in obtaining compensation from my husband and mother-in-law. After that, peaceful days returned to me. I have started working again at a travel agency in Cancun, introduced by my brother. I endured a lot of hardships in the past, but from now on, I want to cherish myself more and lead a joyful and happy life.
I stood in the kitchen, my hands gripping the edge of the counter so tightly, my knuckles turned white. Michael's words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. "Lily, we need to talk about Mom," he said, his voice tinged with that familiar mix of guilt and determination. I turned to face him, my heart already sinking. What about her? Michael ran a hand through his graying hair. Her house needs emergency repairs, the foundation's cracking, and it's not safe for her to stay there. Okay, I said slowly, bracing myself for what I knew was coming next. She needs to move in with us, just for a few months until the work's done. The words hit me like a physical blow. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. Michael, we can't. You know how she is. She'll take over our lives. She's my mother, Lily. What am I supposed to do? Let her live in a dangerous house? I could feel the frustration building inside me. There are other options. We could help her find a short-term rental, or... We can't afford that, Michael cut me off. And she won't go for it anyway. She's family. This is what family does. I bit back a bitter laugh. Family. As if Martha had ever treated me like family in the 30 years I'd been married to her son. Did you already tell her yes? I asked, already knowing the answer. Michael's silence was confirmation enough. Of course you did, I said, my voice rising. Without even talking to me first. This is our home, Michael. Our life. Don't I get a say? I'm sorry, Lily, he said, not sounding sorry at all. But it's done. She'll be here next week. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. Next week? Michael, that's not enough time to... To what? He snapped. To come up with more excuses? She's coming, Lily. End of discussion. I watched him storm out of the kitchen, leaving me alone with the weight of his decision crushing down on me. I sank into a chair at the table, my mind reeling. Martha, living here. The thought alone was enough to make me want to run screaming from the house. The phone rang, startling me out of my daze. I answered it without thinking. Hello, dear, came Martha's saccharine voice. I hear I'll be staying with you for a while. Won't that be lovely? I gritted my teeth. Hello, Martha. Yes, Michael just told me. Oh, good. I'm sure you'll make me feel right at home. You always were such a competent little homemaker. I could practically hear the sneer in her voice. I'll do my best, I managed to say. I'm sure you will, Martha said. Oh, and dear, I hope you don't mind, but I'll need to bring Fluffy with me. You know how attached she is to her special chair. I'm sure you can find somewhere else to sit in the evenings. Fluffy, Martha's ancient, ill-tempered cat that hated everyone but her, and her special chair was my favorite reading spot in the living room. Of course, I said, my free hand clenching into a fist. Whatever makes you comfortable. Wonderful. I knew you'd understand. See you next week, dear. The line went dead, and I let the phone drop from my hand. I stared at it, lying there on the table as the full reality of what was about to happen crashed over me. Martha was coming. She was going to invade my home, criticize my every move, and make my life a living hell. And Michael, the man who was supposed to be my partner, my protector, had invited her in without a second thought. I stood up, my legs shaky. I needed air. I needed space. I didn't know what I needed. But I knew one thing for certain. My life was about to change, and not for the better, and I had no idea how I was going to survive it. The day Martha moved in, our house transformed into a battleground. I'd spent the week preparing, scrubbing every surface until it gleamed, hoping to avoid her criticism. It didn't work. Oh, Lily, Martha said, wrinkling her nose as she stepped inside. You really should dust more often. I can see cobwebs in that corner. I bit my tongue, forcing a smile. I'll take care of it, Martha. Michael lugged in her suitcases, grunting with effort. Where do you want these, Mom? The guest room, of course, she said, as if it were obvious. Though I suppose we should start calling it my room now. I felt a twinge of panic. But that's my office. I need that space for work. Martha's eyes narrowed. Work? At your age? Shouldn't you be thinking about retirement, dear? I'm only 58, I protested, and I love my job. Well, I'm sure you can find somewhere else to play with your computer, Martha said dismissively. A grown woman shouldn't need a whole room for a hobby. I looked to Michael, silently pleading for support. He avoided my gaze. Mom's right, Lily, he said. You can set up your laptop in the living room or something. I felt like I'd been slapped. But it's settled then, Martha interrupted. Michael, be a dear and move my things in. Lily, why don't you make us some tea? I retreated to the kitchen, my hands shaking as I filled the kettle. This was only the beginning, and already I felt like a stranger in my own home. The next few days were a blur of snide comments and barely concealed insults. Martha criticized everything from my cooking to my clothes to the way I folded towels. And Michael, the man who once promised to stand by me through thick and thin, said nothing. One evening, I was working late on a project, my laptop balanced precariously on the arm of the sofa. Martha's cat Fluffy had claimed my favorite chair, hissing whenever I got too close. "Still pecking away at that thing?" Martha's voice made me jump. "It's nearly 9 o'clock, you know. A wife should have dinner on the table by now." I gritted my teeth. "Michael knows I have a deadline. He said he'd order pizza." Martha clicked her tongue disapprovingly. "Take out food at your age? No wonder you're putting on weight. When I was your age." "I'm not putting on weight," I snapped, my patience finally wearing thin. Now, Martha said, her voice dripping with false concern. "There's no need to be defensive. I'm just looking out for your health. After all, you're not getting any younger, are you? And with no children to care for you in your old age?" The barb about my childlessness hit home as she knew it would. I blinked back tears, refusing to let her see how much it hurt. "I have work to do," I said, my voice tight. "Of course you do," Martha sighed. "It's a shame, really. If you'd focused more on being a proper wife and mother instead of chasing a career, things might have been different. Michael always wanted children, you know." I slammed my laptop shut, unable to take any more. "I'm going to bed." As I stormed past her, Martha called out, "Oh, and Lily, do try to be quieter in the morning. Your stomping around wakes me up, and I need my beauty sleep." I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, Michael snoring softly beside me. How had it come to this? How had I let myself become a doormat in my own home? Something had to change. I couldn't go on like this, swallowing my anger and hurt day after day. But what could I do? As I drifted off into an uneasy sleep, a plan began to form in my mind. If Martha and Michael wouldn't listen to my words, maybe they needed to hear them played back. Tomorrow, I decided, I would buy a voice recorder. It was time to gather evidence of the hell my life had become. Little did I know, that decision would set in motion a chain of events that would change everything. The tiny voice recorder felt like a lifeline in my hand. I'd bought it on my lunch break, heart pounding as I handed over the cash. Now, back home, I slipped it into my pocket, my fingers brushing against the smooth plastic for reassurance. "Lily, is that you?" Martha's voice rang out from the living room. "Come in here, we need to talk." I took a deep breath, pressed the record button, and stepped into the lion's den. Martha sat in my chair, Fluffy curled in her lap. Michael stood by the window, his back to me. "There you are," Martha said, her tone dripping with false sweetness. "Michael and I have been discussing your situation." I felt a chill run down my spine. "My situation?" "Your work, dear. It's becoming a problem." I glanced at Michael, but he wouldn't meet my eyes. "What do you mean?" Martha sighed dramatically. "You're never home, always hunched over that computer. It's not healthy, and it's certainly not fair to Michael." "I'm providing for us," I said, my voice tight. "My job is important." "More important than your family?" Martha's eyes narrowed. "Michael tells me you haven't even started dinner yet. It's already 6 o'clock. I bit back a retort, acutely aware of the recorder in my pocket. "I was planning to cook after I finished my project." "See?" Martha turned to Michael. "This is exactly what I'm talking about. No wonder you two never had children. She's too busy playing career woman to be a proper wife." The words hit me like a physical blow. I looked to Michael, silently begging him to defend me. He cleared his throat. "Mom's right, Lily. Maybe it's time to think about cutting back at work. We could use the help around here." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Michael, my job pays our mortgage. It's not some hobby I can just give up." "Don't be dramatic," Martha scoffed. "Michael makes plenty. You don't need to work. Unless—" She paused, her eyes glinting maliciously. "Unless you're planning to leave him. Is that it? Are you squirreling away money for a divorce?" "What?" "No," I sputtered, shocked by the accusation. Michael finally turned to face me, his expression a mix of hurt and anger. "Is that true, Lily? Are you planning to leave me?" I felt like I was drowning, gasping for air in a sea of absurdity. "Of course not. How could you even think that?" "Well, what are we supposed to think?" Martha interjected. "You're always working, never home. You barely speak to Michael anymore. If you're not saving for a divorce, then what exactly are you doing?" I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came out. How had we gotten here? How had my hard work and dedication become twisted into something sinister? I think, Martha said, her voice low and dangerous, that it's time you made a choice, Lily. Your family or your precious career? Michael nodded, his face set in grim lines. She's right, Lily. Something has to change. I stood there, frozen, as the weight of their words crashed over me. They were asking me to give up everything I'd worked for, to become the subservient housewife I'd never wanted to be. In that moment, something inside me snapped. A lifetime of swallowing my anger, of biting my tongue, of trying to please everyone but myself. It all came rushing to the surface. No, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. What was that? Martha leaned forward, her eyes glittering with triumph. I straightened my spine, looked her dead in the eye, and said, No, I won't choose. I won't give up my career, and I won't let you bully me anymore. The room fell silent. Martha's mouth hung open in shock. Michael stared at me like he'd never seen me before. I turned on my heel and walked out, my heart pounding in my chest. As I climbed the stairs to what used to be my office, I could hear Martha's shrill voice behind me. Michael, are you going to let her speak to me like that? Do something. But I didn't stop. I didn't look back. For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. The recorder was still running in my pocket, capturing every word. This was just the beginning. The day of Ruth's 80th birthday arrived, and I felt sick to my stomach. I'd spent the past week avoiding Martha and Michael as much as possible, retreating to our bedroom with my laptop whenever I could. The voice recorder had become my constant companion, capturing every snide comment and heated argument. As we pulled up to Ruth's house, I plastered on a smile. Ready? I asked Michael. He grunted in response, barely looking at me. We'd hardly spoken since my outburst, the silence between us growing heavier by the day. Martha tottered out of the back seat, already unsteady on her feet. She'd started drinking in the car, claiming it was to calm her nerves. I bit my tongue, knowing any comment would only lead to another fight. Ruth greeted us at the door, her face lighting up when she saw me. Lily, dear, so good to see you. She pulled me into a warm hug, then turned to Michael and Martha with a noticeably cooler demeanor. Hello, you two. I felt a small surge of satisfaction at Ruth's obvious preference for me. At least someone in this family was on my side. The party was in full swing, the backyard filled with friends and relatives. I mingled, grateful for the chance to talk to people who didn't constantly belittle me. But I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled in my stomach. That feeling proved justified when Martha clinked her glass, demanding everyone's attention. I'd like to make a toast, she slurred, her eyes unfocused, to my darling son, Michael, and his wife. I tensed, sensing trouble. Michael, Martha continued, her voice growing louder, you've always been such a good boy, so patient, even when you married beneath you. A hush fell over the crowd. I felt all eyes turn to me, my cheeks burning with humiliation. Mom, Michael said weakly, maybe we should sit down. But Martha was on a roll. No, I need to say this. Lily here, she thinks she's so smart with her fancy job, but what kind of wife is she? Can't even give you children, can't even cook a decent meal. I stood frozen, unable to believe this was happening. Where was my voice recorder? I needed proof of this moment, this public humiliation. And now, Martha went on, swaying slightly, now she's trying to turn you against me. Your own mother. Well, I won't stand for it. It's time you put her in her place, Michael. Tell her who's really important in this family. I turned to Michael, silently pleading with him to stop this, to defend me. But to my horror, he nodded. You're right, Mom, he said, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent yard. Lily's been selfish. She needs to learn her place. The world seemed to tilt around me. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. All I could feel was the weight of dozens of pitying stares. Ruth's voice cut through the fog. That's quite enough, she said sharply. Martha, Michael, you should be ashamed of yourselves. But the damage was done. I turned and ran, tears blurring my vision. I found myself in Ruth's guest bathroom, locking the door behind me. As I splashed cold water on my face, I caught sight of my reflection in the mirror. Who was this woman staring back at me? This broken, humiliated shell of a person? No, I wouldn't let them do this to me. I wouldn't let them reduce me to nothing. With shaking hands, I pulled out my phone and the voice recorder. I had weeks of evidence, weeks of abuse and gaslighting and manipulation. It was time to use it. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what I was about to do. This would change everything. There would be no going back. But as I replayed Martha's drunken tirade in my mind, as I remembered Michael's betrayal, I knew I had no choice. It was time to fight back. I unlocked the bathroom door, my head held high. Let them think they'd broken me. Let them think they'd won. They had no idea what was coming. I emerged from the bathroom, my heart pounding but my resolve firm. The party had resumed its uneasy chatter, but I could feel the weight of curious glances. Martha's drunken tirade had left a palpable tension in the air. Ruth approached me, concern etched on her face. "Lily, dear, are you all right?" I managed a tight smile. "I will be, Ruth. Thank you." She squeezed my hand. "I'm so sorry about Martha and Michael. Their behavior is inexcusable." "You're right," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "and I'm not going to excuse it anymore." Ruth's eyes widened as I strode purposefully towards the center of the gathering. I caught sight of Michael and Martha, huddled together near the punch bowl. They both looked up as I approached, Martha's face twisting into a sneer. "Well, look who decided to grace us with her presence again," she slurred. "Come to apologize for ruining the party?" I didn't respond. Instead, I pulled out my phone and the voice recorder, connecting them with shaking hands. "What are you doing?" Michael asked, his brow furrowed. "Something I should have done a long time ago," I replied. Before they could stop me, I pressed play. Martha's voice, shrill and cruel, filled the air. "You're a disgrace, Lily. A barren, useless woman. Michael deserves better than you." Gasps rippled through the crowd. I watched as shock and horror dawned on the faces around me. Michael lunged forward, trying to grab the recorder. "Turn that off!" But I danced out of his reach, letting the recordings continue. His own voice joined his mother's, agreeing with her insults, laughing at her cruel jokes. "You see," I said, my voice rising above the cacophony of recorded abuse. "This is what I've been living with. This is what they're really like behind closed doors." Martha's face had gone pale. You've been spying on us?" "No," I retorted. "I've been protecting myself, gathering evidence of the emotional abuse you've subjected me to for years." The recordings kept playing, a litany of insults and degradation that seemed to go on forever. I watched as disgust and anger replaced the pity in the eyes of our friends and family. Finally, Ruth stepped forward, her face a mask of fury. "That's enough," she said, her voice trembling with rage. "Martha, Michael, I want you both out of my house. Now." "But, Mom," Michael protested weakly. "No buts," Ruth snapped. "I've heard enough. What you've done to Lily is despicable. I'm ashamed to call you my son." As security escorted a protesting Martha and a shell-shocked Michael out, I felt a strange mix of vindication and exhaustion wash over me. The nightmare was finally over, but at what cost? Ruth approached me, tears in her eyes. "Lily, I had no idea. I'm so sorry you've had to endure this." I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. "What will you do now?" she asked gently. The question hung in the air, heavy with implications. I looked around at the faces of our friends and family, some supportive, others uncomfortable. I thought about the house I'd returned to, now tainted by months of abuse and betrayal. In that moment, I knew I couldn't go back. Couldn't pretend things could ever be the same. "I don't know," I admitted. "But I know I can't stay with Michael. Not after this." Ruth nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Whatever you decide, you have my support. Your family, Lily, the kind of family I'm proud to have." As the party slowly dispersed, I stood alone in Ruth's backyard, watching the sun set on the life I'd known. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with legal battles and emotional turmoil. But for the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of hope. I'd found my voice, my strength. And I knew whatever came next, I would face it on my own terms. The recorder sat heavy in my hand, a testament to my resilience and a key to my freedom. Tomorrow, I decided I would call a divorce lawyer. It was time to start my new life. The days following Ruth's birthday party were a whirlwind. I'd moved out of our house, staying with a sympathetic coworker while I sorted out my next steps. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from Michael, alternating between angry accusations and desperate pleas for forgiveness. I ignored them all. Today, I sat in my lawyer's office, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. The recordings I'd made were spread out on the desk between us, along with financial documents and other evidence of Michael and Martha's mistreatment. "This is strong stuff, Lily," Sarah, my lawyer, said. With this evidence, we have a solid case for emotional abuse and grounds for divorce. I nodded, a mix of relief and anxiety churning in my stomach. What's our next step? We file for divorce and... Sarah was cut off by a commotion outside her office. The door burst open, and Michael stormed in, his face red with anger. Martha trailed behind him, her eyes darting around the room. "How dare you?" Michael shouted, slamming his hands on the desk. "You think you can just walk away and destroy our family?" I flinched but held my ground. "There's nothing left to destroy, Michael. You and Martha took care of that." Sarah stood, her voice stern. "Mr. Thompson, you need to leave. This is a private meeting." Michael ignored her, his gaze fixed on me. "You manipulative bitch. Those recordings? They're out of context. You've turned everyone against us." "The recordings speak for themselves," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Everyone heard the truth." Martha stepped forward, her face a mask of false concern. "Lily, dear, we're worried about you. You're not thinking clearly. Come home and we can work this out as a family." I almost laughed at the absurdity. "Family? You've never treated me like family. You've both made it clear that I'm nothing but a nuisance, a failure as a wife and woman." "That's not true," Michael protested, but his words rang hollow. Sarah moved towards the door. "I'm calling security. You need to leave now." As if on cue, 2 security guards appeared in the doorway. Michael's face contorted with rage. "You'll regret this," he snarled. "I'll make sure you walk away with nothing. You hear me? Nothing." As the guards escorted Michael and Martha out, I felt my resolve wavering. Was I really prepared for the battle ahead? Sarah returned to her seat, her expression grim. "I'm sorry about that, Lily, but their behavior only strengthens our case." I nodded, trying to steady my breathing. "What did Michael mean about me walking away with nothing?" Sarah's eyes narrowed. "Let's take a closer look at those financial documents." As we pored over bank statements and investment records, a sickening realization dawned on me. Large sums of money had been moving out of our joint accounts for months, funneled into accounts I didn't recognize. "He's been hiding assets," Sarah said, her voice tight with anger. "Preparing for this, most likely." I felt the room spin around me. All those years of hard work, saving, planning for our future, and Michael had been systematically dismantling it behind my back. "What do we do?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Sarah's expression was determined. "We fight. We'll need forensic accountants, maybe even private investigators. It won't be easy, Lily, but we can prove what he's done." I closed my eyes, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what lay ahead. The divorce, the financial battle, the inevitable smear campaign Michael and Martha would wage against me. It all seemed insurmountable. For a moment I considered giving up. Maybe it would be easier to crawl back, to accept Michael's version of events, to return to the life I knew, no matter how miserable. But then I thought of the recordings, of the years of abuse and gaslighting. I thought of Ruth's support, of the shocked faces at the party when they heard the truth. I couldn't go back. Not now. Not ever. I opened my eyes, meeting Sarah's gaze. "Okay," I said, my voice growing stronger. "Let's do this. Whatever it takes, I'm ready." As Sarah began outlining our strategy, I felt a strange mix of terror and exhilaration. The road ahead would be hard, but for the first time in years, I was fighting for myself, and I was determined to win. The courtroom buzzed with tension as I took my seat beside Sarah. Across the aisle, Michael and Martha sat with their lawyer, both of them glaring daggers at me. I forced myself to look straight ahead, focusing on the judge's empty chair. This was it. The culmination of months of legal battles, financial investigations, and emotional turmoil. Everything I'd fought for hung in the balance. As the judge entered and the proceedings began, I found myself reliving the journey that had brought me here. The recordings that had exposed the truth, the shocking discovery of Michael's hidden assets, the grueling depositions where I'd had to relive every moment of abuse and betrayal. Sarah squeezed my hand reassuringly as she stood to present our case. Her voice was clear and confident as she laid out the evidence of emotional abuse, financial deception, and the systematic effort to undermine my self-worth and independence. "Your Honor," Sarah said, "the recordings you're about to hear demonstrate a clear pattern of emotional abuse perpetrated by both Mr. Thompson and his mother against my client." As the first recording played, I watched the judge's expression change from neutral to disturbed. Martha's shrill voice filled the courtroom, spewing vitriol about my supposed failings as a wife. Michael's voice chimed in, agreeing and adding his own cruel comments. I risked a glance at Michael and Martha. Martha's face was red with anger, while Michael looked pale and sick. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for them. Almost. Their lawyer tried to argue that the recordings were taken out of context, that they were private family matters not meant for public consumption. But the judge wasn't buying it. Context or not, the judge said sternly, this behavior is unacceptable. As the financial evidence was presented detailing Michael's elaborate scheme to hide assets, I saw his shoulders slump. He knew he was caught. Just when I thought it was all over, Martha suddenly stood up, her voice shrill and desperate. This is all a lie. Lily's the abusive one. She manipulated Michael, turned him against me. She's trying to steal everything we have. The judge called for order, but Martha was beyond reason. She pointed at me, her face contorted with rage. You ungrateful whore, after everything we've done for you. In that moment, something inside me snapped. All the fear, all the self-doubt, all the years of swallowing my anger, it all came rushing out. I stood, my voice ringing clear and strong. No, Martha, you've done nothing for me except try to break me down. You and Michael both. But I'm not broken. I'm stronger than I've ever been. The courtroom fell silent. I could feel all eyes on me, but for once I didn't shrink from the attention. I'm not here to steal anything, I continued. I'm here to reclaim my life, my dignity, and the future you tried to take from me. And no matter what happens today, I've already won, because I'm free of you both. Martha sputtered incoherently, but Michael just stared at me, a mix of shock and something that looked almost like admiration on his face. The judge called for a recess, and as the courtroom emptied, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. Whatever the outcome, I knew I'd done the right thing. As we waited to be called back in, Sarah turned to me, her eyes shining with pride. That was incredible, Lily. You've come so far. I nodded, surprising myself with a small smile. I have, haven't I? Just then, a court officer approached us. The judge would like to see both parties in chambers, he said. My heart raced as we followed him. This was it, the moment of truth. As we entered the judge's chambers, I took a deep breath, steeling myself for whatever came next. Win or lose, I was ready to face my future on my own terms. The judge's chambers felt suffocating as we all gathered around her desk. Michael and Martha stood on one side, their lawyer whispering urgently to them. Sarah and I stood on the other, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure everyone could hear it. Judge Hawkins looked at each of us in turn, her expression unreadable. I've heard enough, she said finally. And frankly, I'm appalled by what I've seen and heard today. She turned to Michael and Martha. Your behavior has been reprehensible. The emotional abuse, the financial deception, it's all grounds for a fault divorce. Michael's face fell, while Martha looked like she might explode. But the judge wasn't finished. Mr. Thompson, your attempts to hide assets are particularly troubling. I'm inclined to award Mrs. Thompson not just half of the marital assets, but punitive damages as well. I felt a surge of vindication, but it was tempered by a strange sadness. This was really the end of my marriage, of the life I'd known for so long. The judge turned to me. Mrs. Thompson, I commend your bravery in coming forward. It's clear you've been through a terrible ordeal. Thank you, Your Honor, I managed to say. However, she continued, I'm concerned about the recordings. While they've proven invaluable as evidence, they were obtained without consent. In light of the circumstances, I'm choosing not to pursue any legal action regarding them, but I want to be clear that this is not something I condone. I nodded, understanding the fine line I'd walked. Now, the judge said, I have a proposal for you all. We can continue this trial, air all your dirty laundry in public, and I'll make my ruling. Or you can agree to mediation right now and settle this privately. There was a moment of tense silence. Then, to my surprise, Michael spoke up. I'll agree to mediation, he said quietly. When Martha started to protest, he silenced her with a look. It's over, Mom. We've lost. The next few hours were a blur of negotiations. In the end, we reached an agreement that left me with more than half of our assets, including the house. Michael would pay alimony, and Martha would have no contact with me. As we left the courthouse, I felt a strange mix of emotions: relief, sadness, and an overwhelming sense of freedom. Ruth was waiting outside, her face anxious. When she saw me, she rushed over and enveloped me in a hug. "Oh, Lily," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "I'm so proud of you." As we pulled apart, I saw Michael and Martha exiting the building. Martha stormed off without a word, but Michael hesitated, then approached us. "Lily," he said, his voice low, I'm sorry for everything." I looked at him, this man I'd loved for so long, and felt a complex mix of anger, pity, and something like forgiveness. "I hope you find peace, Michael," I said finally, "and I hope you learn from this." He nodded, then walked away. I watched him go, feeling the last threads of our life together finally snap. Ruth squeezed my hand. "What now, dear?" I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the past few months finally lifting. Now, I start living for myself. In the weeks that followed, I threw myself into rebuilding my life. I redecorated the house, erasing all traces of Martha's presence. I reconnected with old friends and made new ones. I even started taking art classes, something I'd always wanted to do, but never had the courage to try. Ruth and I grew closer. Our bond strengthened by the trials we'd faced together. She became the mother figure I'd always longed for, supportive and loving without being overbearing. One evening, as we sat on my porch watching the sunset, Ruth turned to me with a smile. "You know, Lily, I always knew you had this strength in you. I'm just glad you finally see it too." I smiled back, feeling a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. "Me too, Ruth. Me too." As the sky turned from gold to purple, I reflected on my journey. I'd lost a husband and a life I thought I wanted, but I'd gained something far more valuable, myself. At 58, I was starting a new chapter, one filled with possibilities I'd never dared to imagine before. And for the first time in a long time, I was excited for what the future might hold.